Thanks, Arlene. Good afternoon, everybody. Pleased to be here to speak to the ag crowd. I actually spent one day as an Aggie back in 1966 at the University of Guelph and flipped out to the fisheries side on the second day, but I have fond memories of my ag career, and actually over the last 30 or 40 years in Alberta I've spent a lot of productive time with the ag profession, so it's good to be here. I'm going to give you a whirlwind overview of where we're at with the watershed management planning in the North Saskatchewan River. First of all, how many people understand what watershed planning advisory councils are? How many people have any knowledge or any working relationship? So about 10%. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the organization, a little bit about the river, and then try and make it a little bit more meaningful for you folks. So NSWA is a society, and it was started by the City of Edmonton and Trew Limited about 12 years ago. When Water for Life, the provincial water policy, came out in 2003, they came up with the notion of WPACs. So my predecessors at NSWA applied, and it was appointed as the Watershed Planning Advisory Council in 2005. We have a very diverse membership. It's organizations and individuals. We have a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of counties, federal, provincial government, industry, NGOs. It's really a hybrid organization, plus a lot of individuals. We have about 6 FTEs in terms of staff complement. There's 4 people my age there and 3 younger people, and some of the older ones are working on a part-time basis, but we have essentially 7 staff. Graham Watt is transitioning out. He's going to a job in BC, but that's what we work on. Our budget, just so you understand the dollar figure, we work on about $500,000 a year, and about $250 of that comes from Alberta Environment, and the other $250 comes from our other partners, primarily the City of Edmonton and EPCOR, but also the counties and some of the towns are starting to contribute as well. So we operate on a fairly modest budget, but there's a lot of in-kind. The City of Edmonton provides our offices and RT, so that's very important. If it wasn't for the City of Edmonton, we'd be in a tough go. Water for Life, as I mentioned, was issued in 2003, and it was, I guess, a recapitulation of a lot of things we try to do in water management in Canada in terms of the goals. One of the unique aspects of the approach was to create these WPACs, and there are now 11 WPACs in the province, and Gerard Aldrich here is the executive director of the Red Deer WPAC, but you'll see they're on all the major river basins now. And all the WPACs have been evolving over the last 3 or 4 years. There's been a lot of maturity occur, a lot more expertise being developed. Most WPACs are working on a staff complement of about 3 people, but through the boards and through the societies that they represent, there's quite an extended network, and I've been quite impressed with what I've seen in the last few years. Our job is basically to prepare something called a State of the Watershed Report, which several WPACs have done now, and to prepare watershed management plans, which is what I'm going to talk to you a bit about here this afternoon. Education, information out is a huge aspect of what we're doing, because although watershed science has been well established in rural science and in some parts of North America and some parts of Canada, watershed management is fairly new to Alberta. Lots of watershed science, but watershed management is fairly new here. Our executive depicted thus, Les Gammy is just retired from EPCOR, but he's our chair. Les ran was the quality assurance manager for the drinking water plants in Edmonton, so he's a big interest in water quality. We have some politicians, Pat Alexander and Bob Kitching, and our secretary, Candace Vannon, is one of your crowd. Candace is at the back. Where are you, Candace? There she is. She's our secretary. And about 2009, we overhauled our bylaws because we felt we didn't have a strong enough representation of the big players, so to speak, in the basin. So we expanded the board, increased the number of seats, and this is who our board is now. And as you can see, we've got industry represented through Laurie Danielson from NCIA. That's the group of 24 industries that represent the petrochemical sector at Fort Saskatchewan, so it's quite a large group. We have Bob Winchip from Weyerhaeuser at Drayton, Rod Kaus from TransAlta, Aaron Rodbolson from Husky. But we also have another councillor. We have Alberta Beef, Paddle Alberta, Dr. Naomi Krogman from U of A is a member at large, and a couple of provincial reps, Andrew Shep and Jamie White. So it's a pretty good board. Our vision is to create plans to create water supplies for future generations. That's basically it, and we want to provide leadership and knowledge and encourage collaborative planning. So the notion is collaborative planning, and it's easier said than done. We've gained a lot of experience in the last few years, particularly trying to bring a wide diversity of people together. This is the terms of reference that were approved by Alberta Environment in 2005. And the essence of it is to start integrating land and water planning together. And as I said, there's nothing new to me as a water science person about watershed concepts and watershed knowledge. It's been well established in the world scientific literature for a long time. We just haven't done it here specifically in this province. So this is what it's all about. A bit about the river now. It's a very large basin, like most of the east-flowing basins in Alberta. A wide range of ecoregions from the alpine through to the parkland in the east, and a very wide range of land uses and a wide range of human impacts on the basin. So from a water planning point of view, this basin, as with many others, has got a very, very wide range of issues to try and deal with. And you can see the main stem highlighted, but there are also a whole lot of subbasins. And each of these subbasins has its own story and its own types of issues. So this just adds another layer of challenge to what we're trying to do. So the big basin is 57,000 square kilometers in Alberta. Of course, it travels through Saskatchewan and joins up with the South Saskatchewan to become the Saskatchewan River and then into Manitoba. There are 12 subbasins, and as you go from west to east, they all have very unique issues and things to deal with. In terms of some of the major human impacts, in that box up on the left, you'll get some summary stats. 1.2 million people in this river basin, but 1.1 million live in the Edmonton region, the capital region. So the extended rural population is about 100,000 people. So the capital region obviously has a big footprint on the river. There are 20 counties, so a lot of jurisdictions in terms of who we try to deal with in terms of influencing land planning and land management. The big hydroelectric reservoirs, the Brazeau and the Bighorn, I'll speak to you about in a second. We got a coal-fired energy sector, a big petrochemical sector at Fort Saskatchewan and Strathcona. Ag sector throughout, of course, and forestry in the western region. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of players. Here are the jurisdictions. There's 20 counties that have parts or all of their jurisdiction within the river basin. And of course we have the green area, and then we have 2 national parks. So there's a lot of people to talk to. As an example of a subbasin, this is the Sturgeon River watershed, and you can see how it's configured just north and west of the city of Edmonton boundaries, encompassing St. Albert, Spruce Grove, Stoney, Morinville. And as an example, this particular subbasin has recreational lakes, which have their own types of issues. We have gravel extraction, which we hear a lot about, extensive agriculture, and large urban centers with all the attendant issues. So once you focus down into the subbasins, you're into quite a wide range of issues. So the planning challenge is, it's complex, and there's various scales. You've got the main stem scale, and then you've got all the subbasins. And when you get into the subbasins, you get into very specific local issues. Several jurisdictions and many other sectors involved. And on this particular river, there's been a bit of a deficit of water and watershed planning. In Alberta, there was a lot of effort in the 1980s and 90s on the South Saskatchewan plan. And in the 1990s and 2000s, a lot of work on the northern rivers, and specifically the Athabasca. North Saskatchewan has always been in pretty good shape. We've always had a pretty good supply, and there's been some excellent improvements in pollution control. So in terms of dollars from Alberta Environment to do research and monitoring and planning, North Saskatchewan wasn't too bad, so the dollars went elsewhere. One of the other challenges we've got, which is not unique to ourselves, but there are a number of Government of Alberta planning initiatives, Water for Life, which is our mantle, but we also have something called the Industrial Heartland Capital Region Water Management Framework. You recall in 2007 there was a specter of several upgraders coming into the Fort Saskatchewan area, and as a result the department initiated a very specific water management framework in that region based on water quality, to a large degree, in water quality management. How best to manage potential wastes from upgraders, how best to manage the water demand, and how best to use municipal wastewater. So that's very similar to what we were doing. So there's a bit of an overlap there. Our intention at NSWA has been to promote water quality management as a large template for what we're doing. Then a Capital Region Growth Management Plan and a land use framework activity. There'll probably be, if this thing survives the election and all that, there'll be another planning initiative underway on the North Saskatchewan shortly. So as a WPAC, we have to be very agile and try and interface with all these folks. So a couple pictures of the basin. Most of the water in the basin is generated as snowfall, snowmelt, and rainfall on the east slopes, and that's just above, just going towards Saskatchewan crossing there. That's Abraham Lake. In terms of water supply, pretty good picture. Most of the water, of course, is generated in the headwaters, in the Brazeau, the Clyde, the Ram, the Clearwater. And by the time the river flows past the Brazeau Reservoir, which is by that second pie chart, most of the water that gets into the Saskatchewan crosses the boundary is already in the river by that point. So about 90% of the water is generated in the top 4 subbasins. So obviously protecting the headwaters is a critical thing. A couple of statistics, you know, in all the east flowing rivers in Alberta, we have to pass a certain amount of water into Saskatchewan. It's the Prairie Province's Water Board Master Agreement from 1969, so we have to pass 50% of the annual natural flow. And we also have to meet water quality objectives at the border. Generally speaking, we have a very, very small amount of water use in the North Saskatchewan River Basin. We pass about 97% of the water into Saskatchewan. So it's very different from South Saskatchewan. Most of the water here that's used is lost through evaporative cooling at the power plants. But in total, we only use about 3% of our 7 billion. So we're in pretty good shape. Bighorn Dam went operational in 72, Brazeau 65. And I guess there's quite a history in these reservoirs, and suffice to say that there was a lot of foresight, a lot of planning being done back in the 50s and 60s about hydro production, but also about ensuring supply for the city of Edmonton. And the pink line, the purple line here, are the hydrograph from January to December, the average hydrograph as it was from 1911 to 1963, and as it is, which is in the pink line here, since the 74, since the Bighorn came on. So basically what we've done is we've knocked off the peak flows in the summer, but we've increased the winter flows into Edmonton and downstream, which has been a huge thing in terms of water quality improvement. Upstream of Edmonton, we get into mixed agricultural land here, and there is one specific set of concerns pertaining to drinking water in Edmonton, and that's runoff from the entire upstream basin. But you know, there's quite a lot of work done in Cryptosporidium and Giardia back in the late 90s by EPCOR, looking at the runoff from agricultural streams. And so we have the 2 drinking water plants, E.L. Smith and the old Rossdale plant downstream. So EPCOR has been a very strong supporter of the work we're doing. And as you are probably aware, EPCOR not only services the city of Edmonton, which is that big blotch, but the entire capital region. And now the lines are going to be extended out towards Two Hills and Vermilion. So the management of the river in terms of water quality protection is fundamentally important to drinking water protection. And like I say, EPCOR have been very, and the city of Edmonton have been very, very supportive of all those initiatives and have their own initiatives as well. So just to be clear, there's a lot of land use beyond agricultural land use in the headwaters that needs attention. So I'm not specifically putting any kind of inference on agricultural activity, although the parasites were a big issue back about 10 or 15 years ago. So anyways, drinking water is important. Other part of the story is the city of Edmonton itself and the changes they've made to the sewage works at Gold Bar. This is the Gold Bar plant at 50th Street. And it's gone through massive technology upgrades in the last 20 years in stages. And now the effluent that's being produced, you can see it being discharged there, is so radically different from what it was in the 1970s, and very much different from what it was in the late 1950s. So this river was very, very badly polluted in the late 50s, and it's common for rivers across Canada because our pollution control was just starting to kick in then. So we have to our advantage some excellent master's theses that were done at the U of A on the condition of the river below Edmonton. This work was done during the 1950s and early 60s. And so there was a recognition that the river was grossly polluted, mainly from municipal, but also from the new refinery, the refinery that was built first. And so the people who I first started working for had done their master's theses basically in water quality management issues back in like late 50s, early 60s. And there was a particular professor by the name of Pat Boutillier who was their supervisor. And so in terms of water pollution control in Alberta and in this particular basin, it's been well recognized. So now, generally a good news story. Now, Torsten was up here talking about new contaminants that, in terms of personal care products and pharmaceuticals. In terms of conventional sewage contaminants, this river is greatly improved. It was, it's basically a good news story in terms of those types of parameters. So, and if you look at some simple nutrient data, there's total phosphorus above the city of Devon. Sorry, the bottom line is above the city. The top line is downstream of the city of Edmonton. You can see progressively, we're at really low levels now. We're down around 30 or 40 micrograms per liter TP. So it's pretty good. And the reason for that is the great drop in waste loadings in these last 20 years. You can see these stacked bar graphs, how they're coming down. We had, you can notice the first box, the animal waste, the blue box there. We had great abattoirs and great packing plants in Edmonton, and they discharged pretty horrible stuff into the system. They were pretty well gone by the late 60s and highly regulated. And now the remaining load, which is a reflection of increasing population in Edmonton, has been knocked down by the technology improvements. So it's a good news story. And the city of Edmonton is working through the Heartland process, the industrial Heartland process, to manage to a total loading figure. I won't go into it, it's a long story, but there's been some excellent water quality management activity and recently in the last 2 years. So those two wastewater plants are downstream, Gold Bar, 50th Street near Capilano, and the other one is the Capel Region plant, which services Stony and Spruce, St. Albert, Leduc, and that's about a 25-year-old plant. The big industrial zones, of course, are in Strathcona and down in Fort Saskatchewan. So in terms of the river, in terms of the main stem, that's your big footprint in terms of pollution. And the water management framework, they're just about finished it. In fact, I think they're having a big meeting today in Edmonton. They've been working away on it for 3 or 4 years. Very advanced water quality modeling and looking at allocating waste loads to industry and to the city. So for the big picture, those are the big issues. Again, if you're the Premier of Saskatchewan and wondering about your water coming from Alberta through the North Saskatchewan, those are the big factors. The headwater supply needs to be protected. The reservoirs and how they operate have forever changed the flow pattern of the river with some advantages. Upstream runoff as it affects the city and through the Capel region itself, I've just explained all the impacts there. The industrial heartland, Saskatchewan or Strathcona Industrial Association and the industrial effects. So, and fortunately for the folks in Saskatchewan, we don't use a great deal of our water. So there's a little overview of the river. Now, just to finish this up, just a few things on what we've been up to with NSWA. In the first 4 or 5 years, they produced a number of really good descriptive documents. The North Saskatchewan River Guide, the State of the Watershed Report for the river, or for the watershed, I should say, a document to nominate the river as a Canadian Heritage River, a municipal guide for municipal planners, which is excellent, and a little toolkit for small groups starting up. And these were descriptive reports, but they had quite an impact. The North Saskatchewan River Guide, top left, was written by Billy Milholland and with a committee, and we printed 7,500 copies, and they're all gone. So we're proposing to redo that this year and call the North Saskatchewan River and Watershed Guide. So there's, on an educational side, it's been good. And then on the technical side, my background was technical, and we got a few other technical people there in the last 4 or 5 years. So what we focused on was trying to consolidate the scientific information for the river, because there hadn't been any planning for a long, long time. So what we did, we went out and did the basic stuff. The basic information on water use and demand. For instance, who gets the water? Who is allocated the water and how much is being used? Water supply, the hydrology, where's the water come from? We took a stab at looking at climate change effects, which we have, there's been a lot more work done by Dave Sachin and his colleagues the last few years, so there's another new perspective on how cyclical drought occurs in this region. We developed water quality objectives. We worked with Alberta Environment to develop EFDC, an advanced water quality model. We had Mike Sullivan from SRD do a cumulative effects assessment using ALCES. We worked with Worley Parsons and did a groundwater overview report. What are the issues? What do we know? What don't we know? We did a specific thing on Vermilion River, the Vermilion River sub-basin of water supply and demand. We can come back to that when I finish. We did some economic work with John Thompson, and we created economic profiles of the entire river, and we looked at the value of ecological goods and services. And lately we've been working with stewardship groups. We did a little State of the Watershed report for Mayatan Lake, and we've done a creative sentencing project with the Solicitor General on the regulation of water use in Alberta. That was just an educational thing. And this year we're going to finish an atlas of the basin this spring. This other thing that with an asterisk is a new project. I've kind of alluded to a whole lot of different types of issues, whether it's agriculture, whether it's urban, or whether it's industrial, or whether it's mining, or whether it's gravel pits. And all these tidbits of information are walking around in people's skulls, but they're not written down anywhere in a quantitative way that you could use for water planning. So we're going to do something called an e-scan. We're going to go into each of these sub-basins and try and quantify as much as we can what's actually going on the ground now. And then we're going to look out 25 or 50 years, because that whole forecasting thing hasn't been done either. So this is very practical stuff. We're trying to develop an improved water quality management plan for the basin. And then the last thing, in-stream flow needs. A large focus of our work here has been on water quality management. And I've alluded to the fact that we have a pretty good flow system. We're not too taxed here. However, we still need to plan ahead. So we're going to start the water quantity planning, hopefully with something called in-stream flow needs, okay? Now, in the South Saskatchewan Basin, about 10 years ago, there was a comprehensive look at what flows you need for water quality, what flows you need for fish, what flows you need for riparian, what flows you need for channel maintenance. These are all very specific things to rivers and to in-stream use of rivers. So we want to do that for North Saskatchewan. And so that crazy schematic just summarizes that we're going to try and start with fisheries in the orange boxes and then eventually look for the other ones here. So we're in a good situation, but we have to plan ahead. Got to do it. So. And finally, in terms of the formal planning that we do, we issued a discussion paper last January, which summarized all the technical issues that we were aware of, summarized the relevant policies. We made recommendations, we being the collaborative, made recommendations for the management of the river and the watershed, water quality, flows, groundwater, and many other things. And we sent it out with a questionnaire, and we've reviewed all the feedback, and we're just in the process of finalizing a guidance plan for this river. So this thing called an integrated watershed management plan is going to be very high level. It's going to be very high level, and it's going to allude to who's got lead responsibilities in doing the work. It's been a huge effort, not just like the science is the easy part. That's the easy part. The hard part is trying to work under the Water for Life paradigm, which is totally voluntary. Nobody has to belong to NSWA, nobody has to fund, nobody has to participate. You know, we're trying to do all this practical work, so it's a real tough gig. It really is. So our plan will be a high-level plan with hopefully common sense advice, protecting the watershed and integrating land and water planning. We've done a couple of hundred different presentations and briefings and trade shows in the last couple of years, trying to get the word out. So it's been a huge effort. That's the workbook, and maybe somebody in the room responded to it. If you did, thank you very much. We sent out, here's some statistics for you. We sent out 1,500 workbooks, and we got 106 back. Certain number of individuals, but then the rest are all organizations, NGOs, industry, and government, including the federal and provincial, and a large number of counties. Virtually all the counties replied. So we feel, although the absolute number of responses is small, the fact that we've got organizations and municipalities that have responded and given us advice, that we've got a pretty good take on things. Generally, most people agree because they're motherhood recommendations. The concerns about, okay, who's going to do it? Who's going to pay for it? So we're just finalizing that right now. And I did allude to the Vermilion Subbasin, and that's it there. And just, I guess, fortuitously, about 4 years, well, actually it goes back probably about 5 or 6 years, Ducks Unlimited were very, very interested, and Tracy Scott, who works on our board, really pushed the idea of doing local watershed planning. So in addition to doing the North Saskatchewan Basin, we had the opportunity to do a sub-basin plan on the Vermilion. And so in October, a few months ago, we did this one, discussion paper for the Vermilion. Same thing. Here's the issues, here are the policies, here's our recommendations, what do you think? And we got that back, and we're finalizing that. So we're going to work hard and try and get these two very high-level plans finished by June for our AGM. And this one has been an entirely different experience. Candace Vannon has done a huge amount of work, but this is at the local level. The other one, when you're looking at the Big River Basin, you're dealing with city, you're dealing with industry, you're dealing with utilities. This is one step down in terms of the scale, and largely dealing with the 4 counties and the 3 towns out there. So I think it's probably gone a little more smoothly in terms of identifying issues and building some local buy-in, because it's in the backyard, so to speak. So yeah, so we put that one out, and Graham Watt and Candace and a few other folks are going to be working on that. We have a steering committee that's based out there, largely supported by the municipalities. So, final slide, lessons learned. 2, okay. This is a voluntary model. This is a hard way to do water resources planning. But depending on goodwill and skill sets of people, you can do a lot. Issues are complex, and when you're trying to deal with issues with people with mixed backgrounds, that's very hard. And so you got to be patient, you got to show goodwill, you got to be able to communicate, and the whole business of education, raising awareness, getting out there, meeting with county councils, meeting with town councils, meeting with ag sector groups, whoever it is. It's a huge part of doing the work this way. And in a way, everybody has to be involved. But my final take on this, I wish there was a way we could compel people to be involved rather than just doing it 100% voluntary, because there's confusion out there. Some counties will say, well, why should we support you? Because we do go to the counties and some municipalities for funding. Why should we support you? That's a provincial government responsibility. It's water. So it's a very difficult thing that way. But on the whole, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. It's been really interesting. So that's it.
We have time probably for one quick question. Lynn?
Thank you, David. It's a very interesting presentation. Lynn Crywell in British Columbia Ministry of Environment. I hear your pain behind your comments around the voluntary only takes you so far. And is there any move or interest on the part of Alberta government or on the part of WPACs to push for hardwiring these plans into statutory decisions? You're harnessing a whole bunch of energy around science and policy and local solutions, and there's that gap that sometimes doesn't make it to those statutory decisions.
Actually, all the WPACs, there's 11. We work together, we meet together regularly, and we're trying to establish a collaborative so that collectively we can perhaps influence the province a bit more. This is a work in progress. It was created ideologically, and now we've done it for 5 years, and most of the WPACs have parallel sorts of issues and concerns, so we're going to try and work together and lobby the province. That's the short answer. So I think things will tighten up. It's just the way things are.
Well, thank you very much for that really interesting presentation.
Thank you.
On the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance.